Breaking tonight, Canada pivots to Beijing, defying USA tariffs and shattering decades of U.S.-led trade dominance. America's
USA tariffs backfire as Canada signs a historic trade pact with China. The Western economic order is shifting in real time.
Breaking tonight, Canada just signed a trade framework with Beijing that changes everything. Mark Carney didn't negotiate, he pivoted. And the Western alliance that took 70 years to build, it fractured in 72 hours. Everyone believed Canada would never turn to China. Wall Street expected Ottawa to bend under tariff pressure. Analysts assumed Carney would come crawling back to Washington. They were all utterly incorrect. October the 28th, 2025, Beijing. Mark Carney stood beside Xi Jinping at the APEC summit and said something that made Washington freeze. If trade security is threatened, Canada will not wait. We will diversify our partnerships starting immediately. Translation? Ottawa just told Washington that Canadian sovereignty is non-negotiable. And what happened next? The country that Trump tried to punish with tariffs reveals exactly why American isolation is backfiring, while China's influence expands across the very allies Washington thought it controlled. Dear viewers, between October and November 2025, something extraordinary happened in North American trade relationships. Trump pushed too hard, Carney said no, and China, patient strategic China, became the partner every Western nation started calling first. This isn't just about one failed tariff gambit. This is about the fundamental collapse of American economic dominance and the rise of multipolar trade as the new reality of global power. Here's what matters. This isn't rumor or theory. These are policy shifts happening right now, trade agreements being signed while you watch, economic data that mainstream outlets won't touch because it contradicts everything they've been telling you. You want to see where this is actually going? Stay with me. Rewind to early October 2025. Trump hit Canada with tariffs that were designed to cripple 25% on autos, 35% on steel, 50% on aluminum. The White House called it economic discipline. What it actually became was the catalyst for America's worst strategic blunder in modern history. Trump's calculation was simple. Hurt Canada economically, force Carney to accept American terms, reassert U.S. dominance over its closest neighbor. For about 3 days, it looked like it might work. Canadian markets dipped. Industry leaders expressed concern. Conservative politicians in Ottawa demanded Carney negotiate immediately. Would you mind liking the video to show your support? Your support means a lot to me and keeps me motivated. Then something unexpected happened. Carney didn't blink. Instead of flying to Washington to plead for relief, he boarded a plane to Beijing. Instead of accepting Trump's framework, he started building an alternative. And instead of treating this as a temporary setback, he positioned it as Canada's declaration of economic independence. The meeting with Xi Jinping wasn't ceremonial, it was strategic. Behind those closed doors at the APEC summit, Carney and Xi discussed something Washington had never considered possible. A comprehensive Canada-China trade framework worth $300 billion over 5 years. Agriculture exports through Pacific ports, energy partnerships that bypass American infrastructure, technology cooperation in green energy and critical minerals, and most significantly, a mutual commitment to reduce dependence on unpredictable American policy. Think about what that means. For decades, Canada's entire economic strategy revolved around American market access. NAFTA, then USMCA, defined Canadian trade policy. Over 75% of Canadian exports went south of the border. American consumers bought Canadian lumber, oil, wheat, and manufactured goods. Canadian companies relied on American supply chains. The relationship wasn't just close, it was total. Trump's tariffs shattered that assumption overnight. Ours. And Carney, rather than fighting to preserve the old system, recognized that Trump had accidentally done Canada a favor. He exposed the vulnerability of dependence, and he created the political space for Canada to do what it should have done decades ago, diversify. But Canada wasn't alone in this realization. Across Europe and Asia, America's allies were reaching the same conclusion. When Washington introduced those sweeping tariffs in mid-2025, it didn't just hurt Canada. It sent a signal to every nation that trades with the United States. Your access to American markets depends entirely on Trump's mood. One satirical commercial, one critical news article, one diplomatic disagreement, and your economy could be the next target. Europe responded first. Late September rolled around. Brussels quietly reopened talks with Beijing that had been dead for years. Germany moved fast, signing a rare earth deal with Chinese suppliers that caught everyone off guard. France expanded agricultural exports to Asian markets. Italy joined China's Belt and Road Initiative despite American objections. These weren't ideological choices. They were survival decisions. Japan followed in October. After decades of alignment with Washington, Tokyo signed a comprehensive port access agreement with China, expanding mineral exports through Yokohama and Dalian. South Korea, facing similar tariff threats from Trump, signed multi-billion-dollar electronics contracts with Chinese firms. Even Australia, one of America's closest Pacific allies, began exploring trade frameworks that reduced dependence on U.S. markets. The pattern was identical across every conversation. American allies would reference Trump's approach with Canada, express concern about economic reliability, and ask if China could offer alternatives. Beijing's answer was always the same: yes. And we won't question how you run your country while we're at it. Late October 2025 numbers came out. China's Ministry of Commerce showed 12% growth in Western trade versus the year before. Canadian exports surging through British Columbia ports, most of it heading straight to Asian buyers. European trade statistics revealed similar trends. America's economic isolation wasn't weakening China. Beijing wasn't just gaining markets. It was becoming the reliable option while America looked increasingly erratic. Now here's where the numbers get brutal. U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis dropped their Q3 report. American exports fell nearly 4%. Inflation pushing 5%, driven mostly by vehicle costs and energy prices that kept climbing. Meanwhile, China's share of global manufacturing reached 31%, the highest level in 5 years. American factories that had celebrated tariff protection were now warning of production slowdowns as Canadian materials became prohibitively expensive. Trump celebrated each factory opening in the Midwest. He pointed to reshored jobs as proof his strategy was working. But he missed the larger picture. For every job created by tariff protection, 3 were lost to higher input costs. For every American company that expanded domestic production, 5 suppliers faced bankruptcy because their Canadian components became unaffordable. The economic loop Trump promised would strengthen America was actually suffocating it. And Carney saw it. That's why his strategy wasn't reactive, it was surgical. When Trump lashed out over that Ontario satirical commercial, Carney didn't respond with anger or counter tariffs. He simply redirected Canadian trade flows. He positioned Canada as the reasonable actor in an unreasonable situation, and he made it clear to the world that Ottawa wasn't interested in fighting Washington. It was interested in moving forward without it. The Keystone XL revival offer was brilliant political theater. Carney knew Trump couldn't resist. The pipeline had been Trump's signature energy project during his first term. Biden canceled it. Environmentalists celebrated its death. And here was Carney offering to bring it back as part of a broader North American energy partnership. And it gave Trump an opportunity to claim victory while giving Canada leverage in future negotiations. But here's what most analysts missed. Carney didn't need Keystone to succeed. The offer itself was the strategy. It reminded Washington that Canada controlled resources America desperately needed. The whole conversation flipped. It stopped being about Canada needing access to American markets. Now it was about America needing Canadian energy. Carney positioned himself as the reasonable one, ready to work together if Trump could just stop treating allies like competitors. November 2025 hit. The entire balance reversed. Washington was no longer dictating terms. It was scrambling to prevent further defections. State governors across the Midwest, facing voter anger over rising prices, demanded tariff relief. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce warned that prolonged trade wars were destabilizing American competitiveness. Even some within Trump's own administration began privately acknowledging that the tariff strategy had backfired. But the damage was done. The Western alliance that defined global power since World War II was fracturing along economic lines. America's allies didn't stop cooperating on security. NATO remained intact. Intelligence sharing continued. Military partnerships held firm. But economically, they were building a world that didn't revolve around Washington, and China was capitalizing on every opportunity Trump's chaos created. This wasn't Xi Jinping's master plan. It was Trump's gift. Beijing didn't have to undermine American alliances. Trump did it himself. China simply had to show up, offer stability, and watch as Western nations lined up at the door. The $300 billion Canada-China framework wasn't about ideology. It was about pragmatism. Every other American ally saw this happen. They took notes. Where does that leave things? November 2025 is closing out, and the entire global economic structure is being rebuilt while you're watching. Trump designed these tariffs to bring back dominance. Instead, they've sped up the exact opposite, a world where power spreads out instead of concentrating. China's reach, which Western countries kept at arm's length just 12 months ago, is now extending through Europe, Asia, and right into North America. Canada, always the quiet diplomatic player, turned itself into the connector between East and West. They'll work with anyone who shows up ready for fair terms. Trump set out to teach Canada something. Instead, Carney taught Washington one. In a globalized economy, isolation isn't strength. It's surrender. And the moment you treat allies like enemies, they'll find new friends. China didn't break the Western alliance. America did. Beijing just held the door open. The question now isn't whether America's allies will diversify their trade. They already are. The question is whether Washington will recognize what it's lost before it's too late. Because once these new trade routes solidify, once these partnerships mature, once China becomes the default alternative to American unpredictability, reversing the trend becomes nearly impossible. Trump gambled that economic pain would force compliance. Carney proved that pain accelerates independence. And the world is watching, learning, and adapting. If you think this story's over, you haven't been paying attention. This is just the beginning. Because every nation that watched Canada pivot to China is now asking itself one simple question. If Ottawa can do it, why can't we? Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, please consider liking and subscribing. It really motivates me to keep creating.